Professor Abdelmenem Mardi to welcome on the stage John Norsini. John Norsini was the former president of Famer Institute in Philadelphia. He has been my mentor for a very long time, for as long as I can remember, for as long as I knew anything about medical education, actually. And for him, I'm thankful that I was even involved in the program. Yani we had a very touching story about that, but at the end of the day, our project together started like 15 years ago when we decided to create what we call the Regional Famer Institute, and it was his and I idea. His and my idea. And at the end of the day, it became a lifelong relationship. John Norsini is not anyone. John Norsini is the guru of assessment, and he has a multitude of publications in that area. So he is the reference when it comes to assessment. So we're very lucky to have him in the room. And John will be speaking to us about systems of assessment, correct? Thank you so much.
Can I borrow this?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to use this. Thank you. That was a very lovely introduction, well more than I deserve. Okay. So as Samar said, I'm going to talk a little bit today about systems of assessment, and in particular their use in educational settings. And what I'll do is I'll try and answer these 6 questions. First, what roles does assessment play in an educational setting? Second, what are systems of assessment and why are they needed? Third, what are the elements of a well-functioning system? Fourth, what are the factors that support the development of assessment systems? And finally, I'll end up with a small note about the difference between programmatic assessment and systems of assessment. And I'll only spend a couple of 3 minutes on these, recognizing that you just had your lunch. So what roles does assessment play in the educational enterprise? Well, the first role it plays is the one that we all know about, and that is assessments used to make decisions about students. So when it's the basis for making decisions, it establishes whether students have the necessary knowledge and skills to take care of patients, and at the same time, it protects patients. So this is an absolutely critical function of assessment, and it's the one we're all familiar with. Ever since certainly ever since I was in grade school, the only time folks assessed me was when they wanted to make a decision about me. Second thing is, and it's because of that decision-making capacity, assessment plays a major role in signaling what is important to students. It indicates to trainees what you value and what you think is important, and it motivates them to prepare in ways that respond to those motivations and to your values. The other side of that, though, is that if you choose not to assess something, it can be destructive because students won't value it. So it plays a very important role in signaling. And finally, assessment enhances learning by being the basis for feedback. And there's just a huge ton of evidence indicating that feedback, there are Cochrane reviews. The bottom line is feedback makes a big difference, and assessment is the basis for feedback. Second thing that assessment does is that it actually creates learning. So again, a very pretty series of studies by some folks at University of Indiana. What they did is they took a reading passage, gave it to a group of students, randomly divided them in half. Half the group read the passage 3 more times. The other group took a test 3 times. Didn't get the results of the test, just took the test 3 times. And at the end of the day, 2 weeks later, when they tested them again, they found that the students who had taken the test 3 times did better than the students who read the passage 3 times. Underlying hypothesis is here that in order to learn, it's not good enough just to take things in. You have to practice retrieving them, practice taking them out again. And there's considerable research at this point in health professions education indicating that this is a durable effect. So that's the third and probably the most underused purpose for assessment, is to actually support and create learning. So what are systems of assessment and why are they needed? Well, given those multiple roles, especially in an educational setting, you have to do several evaluations. And whether you acknowledge those evaluations and those individual assessments as a system or not, they still constitute a system of assessment. So a system of assessment exists in your settings right now, whether or not you acknowledge their existence. And as I mentioned earlier when asked the question, historically, in our curricula, what happens is that your graduation depends on completing a series of courses and/or internships or particular clinical experiences of one kind or another. And if you pass each one, then they're all summed together and you pass at the end. So it's a very reductionist kind of approach to assessment. We've developed incredibly sophisticated means for judging assessments in those settings. But that's changing, and that's changing, I think, in large part because of the shift in the curricula to focus instead of on process of education, on the outcomes of education. So the focus now shifts to competencies that stretch along along the continuum of the curriculum. And that's really heightened the importance of assessment, and most importantly, has created a series of dependencies between various courses and between the assessments that are done along the way. This is a wonderful illustration of a system of assessment created by Valdez Bolela, a colleague, who, if you look at figure 1.1, that's no assessment. 1.2 is a single assessment. 1.3 are multiple assessment tools. 1.4 is a system of assessment. So that instead of having these various points of light, you coordinate them in some fashion in order to create a system that produces more results than the individual pieces could by themselves. So the sort of core concepts of systems, and this is well beyond just assessment, but the core concepts are that there are relationships among the pieces of the system, there are boundaries and interactions with other systems. There are a series of stakeholders, and those stakeholders bring different perspectives that need to be incorporated into the development of the system. And finally, the system is dynamic. It changes over time. What are the advantages of thinking about assessment from a systems perspective? Well, the biggest advantage is optimization. You begin to think about how the pieces of the system work together, and you can be more efficient. It offers the possibility of doing different analyses along the way or different syntheses of the data. It offers a much broader view of assessment than a focus on a collection of individual measures. So it also encourages the creation of larger feedback systems that help to identify problems before they occur, and it expands the potential solutions to problems. So what are the elements of a well-functioning system? The Ottawa Conference is a conference that happens every 2 years, started obviously in Ottawa, although it moves around the world at this point, and it focuses on assessment in the health professions. And one of the really unique aspects of this conference, and I think in many ways its greatest contribution, is that it gets together international groups of experts and puts together consensus statements on various aspects of assessment. So it's a wonderful resource. One of those consensus statements in 2010 focused on individual assessments. And as many of you will recognize, given your knowledge of assessment, they came up with a group of factors or elements that were essential to good assessment. So validity, reproducibility, equivalence, the things on this slide. In 2018, the group got together again. We got the band back together, and the group endorsed the 2010 framework for individual measures, but it decided to take on the idea of systems of assessment and think about what makes a good system of assessment, or what are the things you need to think about when you develop a system of assessment. And so we came up, I think, with six or seven, I believe, individual pieces of that. First, the system has to be coherent. It's composed of multiple coordinated individual assessments. Second, it needs to be continuous. It needs to occur throughout a period of training. It's comprehensive. It's inclusive of diagnostics. It's inclusive of summative assessment and formative assessment as appropriate to the purpose of the system. It's feasible. If you create a system that nobody can use, it's not worth it. It's purpose-driven, so it was created and supports the purposes for which it was created. It's acceptable to stakeholders, and it's transparent and free from bias. So what factors support the development of a system of assessment? Well, there are actually already a host of tools and methods that are useful in applying systems thinking not only to assessment, but to just about everything else, any other system that exists. And there are 4 pieces of that: systems mapping, stakeholder analysis, boundaries and interactions with other systems, system dynamics, and I'll talk about each of those very briefly. And then I'll also talk about 2 practical things that I think are important in the context of health professions education. So systems mapping, it is not unusual, at least in the medical schools and residency programs, training programs I've observed, it's not unusual that assessment is completely siloed. There's a limited understanding of what the whole system is, and what one person does in one course isn't necessarily known about what someone else does in a different course, and those 2 things may be at odds. So one of the first steps to applying this is to identify the pieces of the system that might already be in existence, are in all schools, look at their relationships, identify the stakeholders, the intervention points, the problems, and so on. So it's basically creating a map around what exists in a school as a way of identifying where the issues are and how it can be improved. One of the things that is unfortunate about the assessment systems we currently use is that it's often imposed ignoring students, ignoring the patients, community members. So one of the key pieces of developing a system of assessment is making sure that there's a stakeholder identification process, a systematic process for deciding who the stakeholders are at each step along the way. It's important to identify what their power is in the process, what their position is, and what their perspectives are. So in developing a system of assessment, it's absolutely critical to plan for engagement, and there are a range of tools and possibilities for ways to manage this. Boundary and environment analysis. Assessment is influenced, especially in our setting, is dramatically influenced by what happens outside it. It's an open system. So there are things that the assessment process takes in, and there are things it produces that are used by others. So as part of the mapping process, it's essential to understand where those boundaries are and exactly how assessment interacts with each of those boundaries. And finally, assessment systems change over time, as do the relationships among the pieces. As a consequence, the creation of a system is a dynamic process, needs to be included as part of an ongoing planning and maintenance process. In terms of 2 practical facilitators that I think are essential in the kinds of environments we work in, the first is when you do curricular revision, and I mentioned that earlier today, assessment needs to be a part of that process. The committee that creates a new curriculum needs to think about assessment while they're doing that. I've been in a number of situations where the curriculum is created, everybody knows what they're doing, and then somebody says, oh, geez, we have to do some assessment here. And so assessment gets bolted onto the back of this, and it's sort of filling in the blanks. So you're not taking advantage of the curriculum development process to actually have those exact same people think about how assessment fits into the process. Second thing is that, again, in many situations, there's a bond between assessment and particular courses or rotations or whatever. Assessment always occurs within them and not across them necessarily in any way. So it's important, in my view, to break that bond, especially if at the end of the day, what you're going to want to be doing is establishing whether students have acquired particular competencies. In order to support that, I really believe that assessment needs to be centralized. There needs to be some group somewhere in the institution that takes responsibility for assessment and supports people through the process, perhaps teaches, perhaps does faculty development, sets standards for what the various courses need to do. So a centralized process, I think, is really absolutely essential, especially going into the competency-based world. So last thing I'll talk about very briefly is whether programmatic assessment and systems of assessment are the same thing. The words are used interchangeably, and it is a misfortune of the English language that we use them in exactly the same way. So programmatic assessment was developed by the Dutch, and it is composed of ongoing, low-stakes assessment, all of which is summative, and it's feedback-rich, which means that at every point along the time, every time there's an assessment, there's as much feedback as possible about that assessment. The other thing is that in order to make a final decision, all those low-stakes assessments are put together, and then a decision is made. And I think this system has a lot to recommend it. But it is a particular system of assessment. So when people talk about programmatic assessment, what they're talking about is a series of low-stake assessments with rich feedback, okay? Systems of assessment could incorporate any infinite number of other possibilities. So in terms of programmatic assessment, as I said, I think there's much to recommend it, but I have two major concerns about it. The first is that all the assessment is summative. There is no formative assessment built into this. Everybody gets feedback. I think that's great. I think that's how it should be. But they're all low-stakes assessments, and low-stakes assessments are not the same as no-stakes assessments. And they're not the same in two ways. First of all, in terms of the content you use to test somebody. If you want to make a decision about them, you're not necessarily going to use the same kind of content in the assessment as if you were trying to teach them something. So the content is going to be different from summative to formative assessment. The second issue is that students and trainees respond very differently to summative assessment than they do to formative. And part of the issue with programmatic assessment is that trainees, because they're given feedback and told it's low stakes, will all of a sudden assume that this is in their best interest, when in fact they have figured out that it's summative assessment, it counts in the decision that's going to be made, and as a consequence it will be treated as summative assessment. It will not be treated as an educational device. They won't think it's useful in the same way, and they will argue with you 100 times around that. So to summarize, and my summary is walking up, we talked about three roles of assessment: decision-making, signaling, and education. Education being the newer of these and the least used. The needs for a system of assessment, I think, have shifted dramatically with the onset of competency-based education and so on. The elements of a well-functioning system we talked about, the Ottawa Consensus Statement contains those. Factors supporting the development of assessment systems, we talked about general systems approach, and we talked about two practical things that are appropriate to health professions education. And finally, we close with the fact that programmatic assessment and systems of assessment are not the same thing. Programmatic assessment is a specific system of assessment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Nassrini. It's a pleasure of mine to reintroduce to you Professor Ibrahim Inouye. I already introduced him as a professional, and while he is walking, I would like to introduce him as a friend. We worked together in Sultan Qaboos University, Department of Anatomy, and we shared the passion for educational technology and medical education. And that was in 2000. 1992 to 2006, 4 years, long time ago. And we had some journeys together, I still remember. We visited UAE, by the way, attended a medical education conference, one of the first medical education conferences in the region, and that was in 2004, it was in Al Ain. We also visited the Arabian Gulf University as members of the curriculum committee to have a look at their problem-based learning curriculum. So I still remember that journey. And we taught a summer course in Oman Medical College, now the National University in Sohar. Please welcome Ibrahim Noor. He's going to talk to us about one of our other shared passions, which is OSCE. And by the way, he tried to explain why are we anatomists talking about the OSCE. Actually, we had the same passion about the OSCE, so please.
Just before this mic, please. This mic.
Use that one.
Yes.
Use this one?
Yes, please.
Okay.
You've had this one.
And just before that, please announce that you're doing the OSCE.
Yes, by the way, mentioning the OSCE, those who didn't register for tomorrow's workshop about the OSCE, registration is still open. You can join us tomorrow in the MCG, Dubai Medical College, actually in the Lوتاه technical center, second floor. 8:30, huh?
I just want to ask our speakers kindly to bear with us and stay. At the end of this scientific program, we have a token of appreciation for all of you, so please stay with us. Thank you.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for this invitation. Am I loud enough at the back? Okay, thank you so much for inviting me to share some of my interests and passion, which is being a student of education. I have learned quite a lot this morning, and on reflection, I take away 2 or 3 messages from the previous speakers. I take away the message of simplicity from Richard's presentation, and really that's very striking to me. Whatever we do, simplicity is a key feature, and if it is too complex, no matter how fanciful, how high-tech, it in the end will not achieve its objective. So I take that away, and I thank you, Richard. What I would like to share with you would be a progression of what John just finished, which is talking about, generally speaking, assessment and what is it that makes student assessment worthwhile. And if you got the message from John, then I think you got almost 50, 60, or maybe 70% of what I'm going to be talking about. Because I'm going to be specifically talking about one of the components of an assessment process, which is the objective structured clinical examination. And I would really like to go back to basics. As I said, so many things we do without asking questions. Why are we doing this? We've seen it being done, and we're just carrying on doing that without even pausing to ask a question. Is there a way we could do this better? Is it the right way to do this? Is there literature that supports what we are doing? So I'm really going to go back to very basics, and apologies if some of you will find it really basic, but I think it's important as the discussion about assessment is vital and it's key, both for students and learners. So I thought of coined the talk as OSCE design, consider utility. And this term utility, I borrowed it from one of the gurus of assessment, a Dutch, by the name of Van der Vleuten, and he coined what he called a utility formula. It's almost like philosophical discussion about assessment that he has converted into a mathematical relationship. But first, I would like to share with you, some of you might have seen this tweet from Dubai Media Office, which is that there is an organization which is part of the American Association of Medical Colleges, which is called the Alliance of Academic Health Centers International. And we've had the talk from the CEO of Dubai Academic Health Corporation this morning, where there is now the integration of healthcare and discovery, research, and education, and the realization that improvement in healthcare is not a factor of just people working in the hospital, but there is contribution from other components. And what we are talking about here, education and training of healthcare professionals, is part and parcel of that improvement in healthcare. And the fact that Dubai is moving on with an academic health system, realizing that education is key, and being recognized by having the regional office for Middle East and North Africa for the next 2 years, I think that's an important milestone for us within the city of Dubai and within the UAE to be able to make our impact on the integration of healthcare, education, and research. Now, as I said, improvement in healthcare rarely occurs in isolation. It's not just about the patient care, but training of trainers and training of trainees and research all contribute to finally having an improvement in healthcare delivery. And it's good news that the Dubai Academic Health Corporation, once the corporation is recognized as holding the secretariat for the Academic Health Systems Group, has put up what was thought to be the focus for the academic health system and the region, which are mainly in 5 areas. And I would just want to emphasize on one of the areas, which is adaptation in health professions and medical education as a key component. And that is the realization that improvement in healthcare also requires health professions and medical education to adapt, to contribute to the improvement in healthcare. And the second important pillar, which is about partnership and community outreach. And it is in this relationship that what we are doing today from various backgrounds, from various locations, but the central theme is that we are all partners in the improvement of education and the experience of our trainees. Now, coming back to what is my goal in this talk, I just would like you to hopefully reflect on the meanings of and the learning domains of clinical competence, because I will be talking about OSCE. As most of you are aware, it stands for a clinical examination, and its purpose is to be able to evaluate clinical competence. So I would like us to reflect on what is this clinical competence? What is it, and what does it mean? And then my second and final objective is to share with you the thought of Kees van der Vleuten about utility of assessment and how we can apply that in a very basic, simple terms to query an OSCE, because we'll be talking specifically about OSCE. So, obviously, I'll be talking about clinical competence. Again, as I said, some of you might be familiar with that. What is it? What does it mean? And then to enumerate what are the components that make up the assessment utility, specifically as it relates to an OSCE exam. I think this quote was attributed to Philip Stanhope, who I was told was the 4th Earl of Chesterfield a long time ago. He was a diplomat, he was a statesman, but he said, whatever is worth doing at all, and I agree with him, is worth doing well. Now, in relation to what we're talking about, if we're going to plan an OSCE, then it's worth our while to be able to do it really well, so that we can be able to stand and say that this is an assessment that we can stand by and we will be able to defend. And it's quite interesting that the term OSCE and whatever it means was first sort of proposed by Ron Harden, and if you look at the date, 1979, nearly 45 years, we are still talking about that, and we're still trying to learn more about it. I call that impactful scholarship. And we all know that we use it as a tool for clinical competence assessment. So what is clinical competence then? Because that's my first objective, for us to reflect, what is clinical competence? The literature defines clinical competence as performance. So point number one, it is performance. And that performance is based on medical knowledge, but also elements such as history-taking, clinical examination, practical procedures, and so on. So the OSCE, performance, I think that's my key word, performance. And performance, when you're going to perform, it means that it's something that you perform not only with what is in your brain, but also you need to show. So you need to show something that, you need to show that you know, but you need to do something, and in doing that, you need to do it in a particular way, in an acceptable way. And a clinical competence skill, as most of us will be aware of, will have some knowledge component where in that OSCE station, you will be able to show evidence that you can either apply, or as you go up that you can synthesize and evaluate that station. So that's key. You are trying to demonstrate some knowledge. And also, in that OSCE station, you may be doing something, trying to imitate what you have learned. You may be doing something trying to demonstrate that I am an expert. Or you may be doing something that tries to demonstrate that you have mastered that. And then thirdly, is that you're doing that in a particular way. Not a robotic, mechanical way, but there's a particular way where you put some thought into what you're doing. So, colleagues, again, if you think about that famous pyramid of Miller, the OSCE do not stand here, where it's only one domain of knowledge that is used. But it stands up there, where you use knowledge, where you do something, and you do that in a particular way. So my take or my message is that if you're talking about clinical competence skill, then it is that which is demonstrable. Whoever is the candidate or the learner needs to demonstrate. Whatever is demonstrated needs to be observed. There needs to be someone that observes it and makes a call. And thirdly, it does not only require what is in the brain or in the head of the learner, but he or she shows something through doing. Either that doing is with their hands or with their mouth, and they do that in a particular way within a particular view, within a particular context. So clinical competence, really, you can only be able to establish it through an observed performance. And that is my key message. And therefore, in the context of the OSCE, if you have an OSCE station or an OSCE scenario that requires only cognition, then maybe it's not worthwhile doing. Maybe you could do it in another way that is more efficient. However, it needs some form of cognition, and it needs some form of behavior. I think that is a key message that it often gets missed, and oftentimes you see lots of OSCE stations where you say, does it require observation? Does it require demonstration? And then you keep scratching your head. Examples that are there. If you want to get some student to break bad news, well, they need to be talking to someone. Maybe it's a patient, or maybe it's a simulated patient. If they want to give some information about allow natural death, maybe again they need to be talking. So there is a component of behavior, there is also a component of cognition. So my take-home message here really is that if you design an OSCE, you need to think about, does it require 1, 2, or 3 domains? If you're testing clinical competence, then as much as possible, it should require the candidate to use 3 of the domains of learning. We've used that mostly in assessment of clinical competence. Another key important point is that it needs to link up to whatever you're doing in the course or in the curriculum, no-brainer. Someone needs to observe, and therefore you need to train whoever is the observer, no-brainer. It's important that whatever these candidates are doing, or if you're setting up that OSCE station, that it's not just out of thin air. There is some relationship with that OSCE and what the candidate is going to do at the end of the program. And it's costly. It takes time and effort, a lot of people. And that's why I said what is worth doing well, then what's worth doing is really worth doing very well. So my conclusion of the second part of the talk is that if you want to conclude about ability of a candidate to apply clinical knowledge, to gather data at bedside, and to use interpersonal skills, then OSCE is the model. But if it's mostly about clinical knowledge, without any doing, without any thinking, without any application of behavior, then maybe you need to think about other models rather than an OSCE. And the third and final part of my sharing with you is Van der Vleuten thought about this relationship, which again seems very reasonable, that if you are setting up an OSCE, then it's worth your while to think about the items you're going to use, whether they are having these properties, which link very well with what just John shared with us about the Ottawa Statement on the qualities of an assessment item. And what Keys did was to devise some sort of mathematical relationship where he said utility of an assessment is really a function of its reliability, validity, acceptability, educational impact, and whether it is cost effective. And the message is that really the utility value of an assessment becomes almost zero, null and void, if any of those factors is zero. So if you have your OSCE station or OSCE exam, and none of the OSCE stations are really valid in the true meaning of validity of an assessment, then it contributes to zero, and a product of all these times zero, the utility turns out to zero. So it's important to give a thought about whatever you're going to be setting up in the OSCEs, and think about those components to be able to help you whether the utility is really valuable and it's worth all your effort. And the example is there. If one of the components has zero in terms of value, then your utility of your assessment is zero. Okay? As most of you will be aware, validity is an important question to ask, which is what most of you are aware. What is the degree to which the evidence supports the conclusion made from the test results? So it's not like whatever you set up as an OSCE, it's not that it is valid or not valid, because validity, it's not a property of the test, but you validate the interpretation of the data arising from that specific procedure. So if you have an exam, a knowledge-based exam, and that knowledge-based exam is for students with high reading age, for example, then it is valid for those students and invalid for students who are not there. So it's not that the test is invalid, it's only valid for a specific setting, which in that case would be students with high reading age. So if you apply an OSCE exam, where the OSCE exam is for residents, for example, then it is valid for residents, but invalid for early careers medical students. And we're going to have a workshop, I gather, about OSCE. How would you determine this OSCE station is valid or not valid? And I urge us to join the workshop tomorrow to be able to have a enriched discussion on that. Of course, reproducibility, which again John has mentioned, is a key component. And as we all know, the OSCEs were developed to address the inherent unreliability of the traditional long and short cases. And the OSCE, therefore, is very important in the sense that there is a structured marking, there is such a wider sampling, unlike the long cases, and you also have multiple independent observers. So all these contribute to the consistency, if you like, of the OSCEs over the other methods of assessment of clinical competence. Obviously, we are given a message, we are sending a message to our students, and as you know, learners generally will respect whatever we inspect. And if we show that whatever we are doing in that OSCE has a relationship to what they will do in their clinical practice, then obviously that means that the impact educationally is high, and that means that the utility of the OSCE is going to be high as well. As I said, OSCEs require a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of people, so it's worthwhile to remember that you need to have meticulous forward planning, but regardless of the effort put, if it tests what it's supposed to test and it is appropriately matched to the curriculum, then it is cost effective, even though it requires a lot of effort and resources. And obviously, the OSCEs and generally exams that have multiple assessors and sample across the curriculum, they tend to be mostly received fairly by students because they say, well, it has wide sampling and the decision is not made only by one person. So the perceived fairness and wide sampling is an important component whenever you are thinking of an OSCE station or an OSCE exam generally. So my take-home message, colleagues, whenever you think about the fact that, well, we use OSCE widely, then think about, because it is valid, that's why we use it widely. It's well known to be valid. You need to blueprint that across the curriculum for educational impact. We need to train assessors so that it becomes reproducible, consistent, and it needs to be authentic so that it can be acceptable. And it requires a lot of time and effort, but it's worthwhile if it is valid. And I think this is my last slide. What do you do with the data? Well, again, there's another component of OSCE. How do you set standards? How do you develop quality systems? And I hope we will have a discussion on that in the workshop tomorrow. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ibrahim, for a very enlightening talk. Now, back to you, Afra, to introduce the next session.
Once again, thank you, Dr. Muhammad, for that enlightening talk. Let us continue the program by embarking on an intricate and special journey on the history of medicine. In light of the same, we have the honor of hearing from our next keynote speaker, Professor Osama Al-Chazli. He is a professor and one of the leading surgeons in the field of foot and ankle surgery at Ain Shams University, Cairo. He is the former director of the Egyptian Clinical Fellowship Program and the National Training Institute in Egypt, an expert in the field of medical history, an insightful writer, and a renowned author of multiple novels. A few of his noteworthy works include The Papers of Shamoun the Egyptian and Damiana's Promise. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to welcome on stage Professor Osama Al-Chazli.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be in Dubai Medical College for Girls. And thanks a lot, Samar, for inviting me to present this lecture about the history of medicine, which is part of, related somehow to elective courses which we teach in our university, in Ain Shams University, as well as I presented as well in Barcelona University. Some about my background, about medical education. I'm a former graduate with Summer in Framer Institute. Also, I am professor of orthopedics in Ain Shams University. I am former director of National Training Institute, director of Higher Committee of Medical Education, and also I'm AO Foot and Ankle World Curriculum Developer in Task Force for Orthopedics and Curriculum of Foot and Ankle. Regarding my passion, which is history, I'm a member of the Egyptian Society of Historical Studies. Also, I'm director of the History of Medicine course in Ain Shams University and in Barcelona University. Regarding my literature background, I am a novelist, and I had 2 novels. One of them, which is Papers of Shamoun. It was the most readable book on Goodreads, Arabic book on Goodreads in 2022. and I won the award of Best Writer in 2001. So it means that medicine doesn't counteract against hobbies and against other professions. We can combine both, and we know all medical doctors in Arab countries are named as wise men, Hakim, and this was ancient doctors, how they were. So I decided to teach my students how to combine the passion of their hobbies and medicine through this course, which is elective course, part of the elective course in Ain Shams University. And for the last 4 years, I present this course also in Barcelona University for medical students. This is in Barcelona, this is in Egypt. And in Egypt, I have the opportunity to take my students for tours in ancient Cairo, in Kassel, and we visit the ancient places where we describe it in our lectures. Some of the students got so passionate with this course, and the assignments of these students shows how much they were affected with this course. Some of these topics, like these was projects presented by my students about history of racism in medicine, women in medical history, the dark side of medical history, and deception of medicine through art in different eras. These are kinds of projects presented by the students, and they loved it so much. So today, I will present you just part of the course. Tomorrow, I will present for the students a mini course for history of medicine, but today it's just a lecture. It's part of my course. I think it will be interesting to you, and I hope you will enjoy it. It's about history of epidemics in Egypt and also in worldwide. I usually ask my students, why do we learn history? Because it's amusing, because it's educating. If we could understand the past, we will be able to justify the present, and we can have insights for the future. This is why I teach them the theories of old medicine, how the theories starts and change it. Until now, we are in the genetic theory of medicine now, starting from the old ancient theories in prehistoric time. In this small lecture, I will review with you the history of epidemics in prehistoric time, ancient Egypt, Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, Islamic ages, medieval ages, and in recent times. The most important is that epidemics doesn't affect only health. It has a social effect, it has economic effect. So part of this lecture is to see how the world it changes after major epidemics. And we can give insights about our current situation, how the world now is going to change after the coronavirus epidemic. Let's start with the prehistory. And the question, did we know that there is diseases in ancient time? Yes. We have a kind of science which is called paleopathology. It's studying the fossils to detect the diseases in ancient time. One of these paleopathologists in the Museum of London is about osteochondroma. It's a kind of bone disease, tumor, happens in the fossils in ancient Egypt. But did human beings knew viruses, bacteria, and other infectious agents in the ancient time? Yes, this happened also. We have, through paleopathology, we could detect trachoma in some dead bodies dated to 8000 BC, tuberculosis in 7000 BC, plague in 4800 BC. The fortunate or the good thing, at that time there was no much communication, no trading, so there is no major epidemics we could understand at that time, but diseases were existing with the human beings since the early creation. The theory of disease in prehistoric time, there is no evidence about how they were practicing. The kind of practice of medicine was based on communication with supernatural forces, and this kind is known as shamanism. Shamanism is referred to the word shaman, or the person who knows. There was a magician who knows everything, and he treats diseases by communication with supernatural forces. But the first recorded epidemic in history, which you can say it's epidemic, was recorded in China, like the last one started in China, in 2 cities in 2000 BC, when Thomas Purels in Mexico and also in Hamin Magna, they found stuffed bodies of hundreds of bodies in these houses, and they found it due to some kind of epidemics at this area. The first civilization known on Earth is ancient Egyptian civilization. Health system was very good in ancient Egypt. We can read that in the diaries of Herodotus, a historian, Greek one, who came to Egypt in the 5th century BC, and he said Egypt has a very good health system because of the dry sunny weather, the floods, which renew the soil and water twice per year, and the cats, the Egyptian cat, which was called the Mao cat, is the name of Egyptian cat. Each house in Egypt has a cat. People was respecting cats so much. Cats was fighting against rats and mice. And also people was making special burials and tombs for cats. We have in Ilmenia, Bani Hassan, a tomb for around 80,000 cats buried and mummified inside this tomb. The theory of disease in ancient Egypt, we had 2 kinds of diseases, natural diseases due to trauma, fracture wounds, and ancient Egyptians was very professional in dealing with these natural causes. The problem was with unknown causes of illness, which is internal disorders, infections, epidemics, and in this kind of diseases, Egyptians were using incantations just to fight because they don't know what happens. So they doing incantations for these diseases. And there was a goddess for illness called the Sekhmet goddess, and all incantations was communicating with this goddess to fight against these diseases. Although we have the first medical article in history, it was in Egypt, which is Edwin Smith's papyrus, which was discovered in 1862, and it was wrote in 1600 BC. This papyrus, which is surgical papyrus containing 48 cases with different cases of trauma, injuries from the head to feet, all of this stuff, we will find on the back side of this papyrus some incantations against some kinds of airborne infections, which is رقية الهواء الموبوء لطرد شياطين سخمت. I cannot translate it in English, but it's some kind, they are praying to the goddess Sekhmet to protect them against this airborne infection. If there is documented epidemic in Egypt, yes. We have a city in Egypt near to Mania called Tal Amarna, maybe known to the European because it's a place where Akhenaton capital, he made it in Tal Amarna in Minya. And this guy, he is the father of Tutankhamun, and he made some changes in the philosophy of religion in ancient Egypt. What's strange in Tal Amarna, that they found there was successive deaths for 4 persons from the royal family, sequentially. After Tutankhamun died, we had the first prime minister died, second prime minister died, third one, and then we had another man who came to rule and he died. This sequential death was strange. Another thing, there was a big funerals and big tombs, an area, cemetery, which contains 278 bodies aged from 3 to 28. This is a very young age for death in ancient Egypt. So why these people died? They start to investigate that, and from paleopathology again, we could found that there is Plasmodium falciparum in this dead body, which means there was an epidemic of malaria happened in Tal Amarna and killed these people at that time. Also, we read in the Bible and we read in Quran about the plagues, 10 plagues which happened in Egypt. Of course, we read it in the Bible. فأرسلنا عليهم الطوفان والجراد والقمل والضفادع والدم آيات مفصلات فاستكبروا وكانوا قوما مجرمين. And we read it in the Bible when the Lord will bring a terrible plague on you. So the question, is there a plague happened in Egypt which is similar to which mentioned in the Bibles and in holy books. Yes, we have a papyrus called the Admonition of Ipuar, أو احتجاج إبوار. It was like a prayer to the God by a man called Ipuar. Ipuar is an ancient Egyptian word which means the noble man. Ipuar is a noble man. He is telling the goddess that there was people are thirst, are desperate. The river changed into blood with a lot of famine and a lot of diseases and plagues, which is similar to what we read in the Bible. After the ancient Egyptian empire, we came to the Roman Empire, which ruled the world, and we had some epidemics at that time, which was serious epidemics. One of them is the Antonine Plague, which happened in the 2nd century at the Antonine family time, and exactly at the time of Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was a very famous emperor. It's not just an emperor. He is a philosopher and thinker, and he is a book writer, and he's a very great man. At that time, there was Persian-Roman war with this a lot of people, and the soldiers from Roman tried to find treasures in the tombs of the kings of Persia, and they opened these tombs, and they catched some sort of disease from these tombs. Most of researchers say it was a kind of smallpox. They carried the smallpox and went back to Rome, where the crisis happened. 10,000 deaths per day happened at that time. Economic crisis happened in the Roman Empire for around 30 years. Loss of manpower happened, and death of Marcus Aurelius himself, the emperor, happened by this plague. In Egypt, it was affected. We have a city in Fayoum which disappeared at that time. And why in Egypt? Because at that time, Egypt was under the rule of Roman, and Roman emperors and noblemen used to come to Fayoum to spend there as a place for winter time. Fighting of this Antonine plague with Galenos, we all read about Galenos in anatomy as a great anatomist. He's a very famous one, and he describes the disease, and most of his description goes with smallpox, so most probably it was a smallpox. Marcus Aurelius were trying to fight against the disease scientifically by using doctors, but unfortunately people was happy to go to shamans and to these some people who doesn't know anything. So he said a very good statement at that time, and at the end of lecture I will show you another statement by Marcus Aurelius. He said, indeed the destruction of understanding is a far greater epidemic than the corruption in the atmosphere around us. The first socio-economic effect happened when the Roman Empire started to notice that there are some Christian people who are not fear from this disease, and they are trying to healing people, and they are not afraid from the disease. And this made the philosopher start to rethink about this small group of people who were used to be persecuted by the emperors. And one of the philosophers, Athenagoras, wrote a very nice book. It's like apology to the Christians, and he wrote it as the Christian Embassy by Athenagoras. And this was the start of shift of the Roman Empire from being atheist to Christianity at the Byzantine time, at the time of Constantine. In the Byzantine time, there are another plague which is very serious, which was named as Justinian plague. It was named after Justinian. Justinian is an emperor. At that time, we can call with a brave heart, without no doubt, this was the darkest time on earth. It is the worst time. We call it the Dark Decade. Why? At that time, there was eruption of a super volcano in Indonesia, known Sumatra volcano, and this super volcano covered the whole ancient world with a volcanic ash which hid the sun for 4 months. For complete 4 months, there was no sun. This caused a lot of climate changes, weather changes, famine, acidic rains, and lots of people lost their lives and their crops, and a lot of famine. It was a very bad one. And after this volcanic eruption, with 5 years, that happened the worst worst kind of plagues in the ancient time, which is the Black Death or Justinian plague. This plague continued for around 7 years. It started from Egypt, because at that time, crops was moved from Egypt to Byzantine Empire, and the ships were infested by some rats. These rats moved to Constantinople, and the spread of rats led to spread of plague, death of around 15,000 per day, as described by Procopius the Caesarean, the ancient historian who was at that age, loss of manpower in Byzantine Empire, famine and inflammation, and this made the Byzantine Empire weak. Who is the enemy of the Byzantine Empire at that time? Byzantine at 7th century, two forces, major forces, Byzantine and Parthian, the Parthian. This led the Parthian to start to fight against them, and they could, at the time of Hercules, invade Jerusalem, and they took the Holy Cross back to Parthia, Polis, and there was another fight happened. This big war, which is a big social, political change. Just remember, after major epidemics, usually there is wars, economic crisis. So, okay, just rethink about that, about history. We have to reread history again. So there was a big war. It's a major war, world war between Parthia. But this war ended in weakness of both empires, and there was rise of a third party, which is the Islamic Empire in the Arab land. At the Islamic times, there was another plague happened in Amwas. We know it's a town, Amwas. It was limited, but lots of people died. It was in the Holy Land, in Jerusalem, and around this area. What's important about this, people at that time, it was limited, but I believe it was the first lockdown application, seriously. And it was in religious basis, because people at that time started to recall some of the speech of Prophet Muhammad about what should we do at the time of plague spread. And this was the first kind of lockdown. If you hear about plague in one land, if you are outside, don't get in. If you are inside, don't get out. And this was important to make limitation of spread of this plague. In medieval time, in 14th century, happened another big plague, which we all know as the Black Death. This was in 14th century, and it started in China when some of the infested troops came through the Silk Road from China and went to the ancient world. Infection of all big cities in ancient world happened, and in Egypt there was lots of deaths in Egypt. According to Al-Makrizi, the historian of that time, he said the Egyptian population was 6 million, and after the Black Death, they were 4 million died and 2 million existing, which means the Egyptian population decreased by 60% at the time of Black Death. At that time, there is مثل شعبي في مصر. It's just a popular speech, or proverb, say يا وارث مين يورثك. Because at that time, when people was dying, they cannot find someone to inherit their wealth, because the inheritant people die as well. So it's a speech, who will inherit you? Who knows that who will inherit you? It's just a translation like that. And management at that time was a little bit much better. At that time, Egyptians were more in the healthcare was better, so there was isolation hospitals. There were some places to bury the dead bodies, and some of the practices was nice at that time. Let's come to modern age after Renaissance. We can talk about the plague of Jaffa at the time of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon came to Egypt in 1798 to stay in Egypt and to make his Eastern Empire, but he only stayed for 3 years only. One of the reasons of failure of Napoleon campaign was epidemics. Because when he came, he started to extend to Jaffa, and he made the siege of Jaffa in 1799. And people, the city fall, and he entered inside, but he made a big mistake when he made a massacre, and he killed all men in Jaffa and left women. He left women but killed all men. And he even didn't bury the dead bodies. This led to spread of epidemic inside Jaffa. When Napoleon moved to Accra, he tried to invade Accra, but he failed because of the siege of Accra, the walls, the fences of Accra. It was very, very well constructed castle in Accra, so he couldn't invade Accra. When he came back, he got infected, and his soldiers got infected, his army, by the plague which spread in Jaffa. So historians say that this was the revenge of dead men. Revenge of dead men because the spread of plague. And of course, when he came back, he had a lot of fight, a lot of his soldiers died. Some of the Egyptian soldiers as well died. One of them was Murad Bek from Egypt, and he died from this bubonic plague. Finally, we come to one of the last plague epidemics at the time of Muhammad Ali Pasha, and I address the speech of Dr. Manawi when he talked about the advance in Egypt at that time with Muhammad Ali and medicine practice, when he asked Anthony Claude Peck to come from France to establish the first medical school in Egypt. And fortunately, this investment in education helped very well at the time of Muhammad Ali, when he started to fight against this plague with strict rules of lockdown, strict rules of isolation and treatment of patients, and he made the first quarantine hospital in Alexandria at that time. So we don't see plagues afterwards because antibiotics was discovered. So no more plagues, we don't see it. Yersinia pestis is easily killed by a group of broad spectrum antibiotics, thanks God. But start to have another kind of plagues. One of them was cholera. Cholera comes with a lot of people who are crowded and in crowdness. And this happened in Egypt, in Delta, during a religious festival, Mulid Abul Mu'ati. It's festival for a holy man in Delta, which led to death of 36,000 people in Delta and 18,000 in Egypt. But the nice thing in this plague, or this epidemic, that isolation of Vibrio cholera happened by Robert Koch in Egypt. When Robert Koch came to Egypt, and he started to isolate the Vibrio cholera from the Egyptian cases. Antibiotics in the 19th century was the answer for all bacterial infections. But it seems the fight between human beings and microorganisms will not stop. Because after we could defeat these bacteria, suddenly we start to have virus infections in a very aggressive way. And the first was the Spanish flu. It is the first serious encounter between human beings and viruses. At the end of World War I, of course, it's not Spanish. You know, all you know the story, why it's Spanish, but it doesn't start in Spain. It started in United States, but at that time it was World War. Spanish was non-allied country, so it was accused. All people start to follow up the cases in Spain, not to mention the real cases in the German camp or United States camps. But with this serious virus infection, 50 million of people died. Again, major epidemic, so we should expect socio-economic crisis worldwide. We may expect some wars, and this is what happened. One of the worst economic crises happened in 30s at that time in the United States with the Great Depression. All of this stuff happened, and the Second World War started to happen. Later in 40s, we had some limited plagues of tuberculosis, which had 40 plagues. Then we had swine, bird flu, and then we had COVID-19 virus nowadays. So do you think after COVID-19 virus, there would be a world change? Do you expect, apart from the Ukrainian-Russian war, any other major wars or reformat of the globe politically and economically after COVID-19? I think history says yes, but we will see later. I want to end my lecture with Marcus Aurelius' speech when he was dying, he said this word. He said, this is a turning point in an infinite time, a knife boundary between two ages. All humans do is smoke and menace. As if what we did in the past was a bird, it disappeared before we caught it. All human wars are like dogs fighting over a bone. And the human being in this world is like a puppet moved by strings on the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Osama, so much for the amazing presentation. And just for all of you the students who have missed this presentation, I just want to tell you that Professor Osama will be tomorrow on campus at the MCG, and he will be giving an extended session on history of medicine. And why is Professor Osama with us today? Because the new curriculum that we are all starting to manage or starting to adapt to, it has the pre-medical session or section, which is 2 years. And a big part of that is courses of history of medicine. We've all started introducing history of medicine into our curricula. And this is why we thought this would be a good idea for you to maybe get acquainted with the content of such a session. Thank you so much. Afra, over to you.
Moving forward is a session on teaching and learning methodologies and the importance of student engagement, moderated by the current head of medical education at DMCG. She has over 25 years of experience as a clinician, a quality assessor, an administrator, and a medical educationist in many countries, including being the lead coordinator of curriculum reform. Under her guidance, she led the college to win the prestigious Dubai Quality Award and Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Awards in 2011. Her special areas of interest include faculty development and teaching professionalism to undergraduate medical students. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Fawzia Shershad.
Thank you very much, Afra, for a generous introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be delighted to moderate the session on teaching and learning. Now, we all know that UAE is moving towards competency-based medical education. And how are we going to make sure that the students have achieved these competencies? We need to have a platform which will help us to assess their competencies on a daily basis and to give them feedback on a regular basis throughout their clinical training. And for this, we will have a renowned speaker of medical education, Professor Muhyiddin Maghzoub, whom I will be introducing very soon. He will be talking about the platform that is used for assessing competency-based medical education. Professor Muhyiddin Maghzoub is a renowned medical educator, and he has been chosen by the Ministry of Education to lead the task force for creating the competency framework for medical education in UAE. And I have had the privilege of being on his team for the last 2 years and working with him. And let us congratulate him for having released this competency framework on Thursday, 2 days ago. Professor Maghzoub has done his degree in Sudan, and later he has done his PhD in Maastricht University. And he has been an advisor for the regional WHO EMRO Health Professions Education. And he's a member of the Faculty of Public Health Medicine of the Royal College of Physicians in London, Edinburgh, and Glasgow. Professor Maghzoub, I invite you to please enlighten us about the e-portfolio at UAE University.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Fawzia, for the introduction. And thanks Dubai Medical College really for this gathering, which really reboost medical education. And we hope that we will work together for improving medical education. And I think now it is late. Maybe everybody lost energy. May I tell you that one strategy really to boost energy when lectures or you have long time of training. May I ask everybody to stand? Everybody to stand? Yeah, stretch. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think this is really good. This is a physical exercise. We have done a study. That and we found really in the middle of a lecture, if you have done, you ask your students to do a physical exercise, this really will increase the attention and achievement of students. So this is really by a clinical trial done in Saudi Arabia. Okay, now we will come to our business, which is a competency-based medical education, utilizing an e-portfolio. Yeah, forward. Forward here.
Yes. The green button.
No, green forward. Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we'll talk about the aims of portfolio. And I think this should be an interactive session, but now this is really a large group, which might not be possible. And I'm sure you all know about the aims and the function of portfolio and the advantage that bring to medical education. So that really the most important is ensure the attainment of program learning outcomes and competencies like Emirates Med, and also provide feedback and reflections. This is really the most important of assessment for learning, not assessment of learning, which is really very important, not just summative, it's formative assessment, and placing the responsibility on the shoulders of students guided by their mentors. And I think this is really a very important function that portfolio can bring, which is really, and also increase the cost. As Dr. Ibrahim mentioned, one of the most important criteria of assessment. And also it enhances student-centered and self-regulating learning by giving them responsibility for their learning and even for assessment. And also it identifies gaps, redundancies, and challenges in curriculum. This is really a diagnostic for the program and curriculum designer. At an enhanced career planning, transition, or progressions. This is very important also, and provide a platform to complement a strong mentoring program. An e-portfolio cannot be successful without a strong mentoring program, training for students, and training for mentors. Moreover, it promotes self-assessment that in a portfolio gives students a chance to assess himself, to assess his peers, and also to contribute to personal and professional development of students, which is also one of the competencies of our new framework, Emirates Med. And measure progress of students across the phases of the curriculum, and it's also measure competencies which are difficult to assess. And as you know, all we are doing a very good job in assessing the competency of knowledge, doing to some extent a very good and excellent job of assessing the competency of skills and patient care, and soft skills like professionalism, communication, health system practice, evidence-based medicine. This really we are not doing a lot, and even sometimes we are not assessing them at all. And support systematic documentation, because the students document all activities, and also reviewing and approving students' portfolio grades. This is, we can use it for summative evaluation, as well as formative evaluation, and it contribute to quality improvement and sustainability. Okay, testing gives you a snapshot And portfolio give you a movie. Actually, it is an active, live kind of assessment. It's complementary. And also it can be used as a system. It's not only an instrument, but it is a system of assessment where you can include system-based assessment and also programmatic assessment as well. So this is our new Emirates MED, and I think this really logo now become very famous because now it's signed 2 days ago, and now, unfortunately, now it's not really voluntary, but now become obligatory because it is going to be part of CEA standards, and CEA already signed it. So now it is not really a joke, so that we have to work together really to see how we can implement this framework in our curricula, and most important for our assessment. Okay, on the left side of this slide, you can see the competencies of the framework, which is patient care provider, just also like CAMED and ACGME, which is joint self and professional enhancer. This is in other framework, it's personal and professional development. Medical expert is also just like CAMED, exactly. ABM, practitioner and scholar. This in ACGME is called evidence-based or practice-based learning. An improvement, communicator, which is interpersonal skills and communication, professional, which is professionalism in all the frameworks, the same. Health system proponent, this also in others, they called health system or system-based practice. And socially accountable, this is really very unique to Emirates MED, which is not really included in other framework, but may be part of other competencies. And this is actually the same as in our new platform, which we developed in the College of Medicine and Health Sciences in United Arab Emirates University. And we have really a very excellent programmer. We hope that also we collaborate in advancing this at the college and will be unified across all colleges in UAE. The platform, which you will see snapshots at the end of this presentation, start with introduction. And in the introduction to students, what is it, why we do it, just like what I mentioned at the beginning about the aim, about the function, and what e-portfolio can contribute to the learning of students. And then he put his name, the level, and what is his rotation mentor or his mentor, and then the portfolio mentor. So this is what divides them into the rotation, and this is really related to the content of the blocks and courses, and the portfolio mentor, which is mainly the, I have 2 minutes, huh? Okay. So this I will really move very quick, personal professional development. This his students, he puts CV, learning content, extracurricular activities, and so on. So this is really an example, and then just I will focus on this only. For example, the personal professional development, students will put his CV, will put his learning contract, extracurricular activities, career choice, for example, on the CV. Then there is a template, how to make a CV, which is really very important. Students early in his training, he should know how to put a CV because in the future he will apply for a job, he will apply for residency and so on. And then in the learning contract, he puts his own strengths, assess himself, and then according to these strengths and weakness, he will put an objectives and then and time frame and responsibility, what he will do. And then the extracurricular activities, which is really also important part of our curriculum, which is his attendance to CME, workshops, webinar, presentation on conferences, anything he do outside the curriculum, which is very important and contribute to his achievement. And there is a chance that to be introduced in the portfolio. And then the career choice, this is also important because a lot of students really fail to get residence and then they go from one specialty to another. But I think if we, from early stage of the curriculum, if he's counsel about his career choice, then it will be good. Then the personal and professional gifts I mentioned. Then the patient care, that is the clinical log, and a lot of things which is the logbook, and you are familiar. And here we also included EPAs, and then this will tell you where he is entrustable or pre-entrustable, and where you can put him as pre-entrustable in each competency. And then the practice-based learning, this mainly dealing with evidence-based medicine, and he will go all the stages of evidence-based medicine, you know, starting from asking questions until he have applies the evidence and evaluates the evidence. At the end of his practice, then his the communication, okay, so I think I will skip this because of the time. And then this is really the portfolio, where you see it in the platform. You can see here that the e-portfolio, the students, he can access his personal professional development, which is functioning now, the patient care, the EPAs, and the student here really will put anything, his reflection, on what he will do in each competency, and then it will go to his mentor. And this is the EPA, which is really very one example that, for example, this EPA one, and you can see it's already aligned. It's already aligned with the competencies. So, for example, this one is aligned with P1, which is professional, and this is aligned with patient care. This is aligned with knowledge, and this is aligned with communication. So already, competencies or EPAs are aligned with competencies, and then we can get, this is really a very important component, which really will tell you about the performance of students in each competency and in relation to his peers. The line, you know, the blue line, or this is the student performance, and the red one is the performance of the class. So in each competency, he can see whether he's above his peers or below his peers. And this is also can map the curriculum with all competencies to see that, for example, for each course, if you can cover your competencies or not. So this is really a functioning life, and it needs really improvement, and we can collaborate to improve this platform and share experiences. Thank you very much. I took some time for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation, Professor Maghzoub. We will have to break. There is a small change in the program. We will have to break for prayer. It will be a very short break. As soon as you have you finish your prayer, take a snack and just be back immediately. We have just 15 minutes, and we promise we'll finish in time. So hope that we will not delay at all. So I request you all to please be quick with your tea. See you in 15 minutes. Keep it away.
Can we be seated, please? Kindly have a seat. Kindly have a seat. We're starting. Our session is starting. The day is not over. We still have exciting session, one more exciting session to attend. Sorry. Please be seated. Thank you. And as Dr. Fawzia said, we promise, we will finish on time, inshallah. Please have a seat. دكتور فوزية ولا انتي؟ اتفقتوا على ايه؟ فوزية؟
Welcome back, everyone. So let's continue our session, or shall we wait for a few minutes, Dr. Samar? Okay. So welcome back, everyone. Let's continue the session of teaching and learning. Here we have a renowned medical educationist who is Professor Kasab from Gulf Medical University and Suez Canal University. Currently, he is the Professor of Physiology and Medical Education and Associate Dean of Academics at the College of Medicine in Gulf Medical University and Suez Canal University. He has held several senior administrative positions in University of Qatar, Arabian Gulf University, and Suez Canal University. His PhD and postdoc has been from Mississippi University, and he has been, just a minute, an advisor of the World Federation for Medical Education and WHO and AMI MR. Is that right? So it is an honor to have Professor Kasab among us, and he will enlighten us about student engagement. Please, Professor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fawzia. I think in this afternoon session with the current audience, I'm looking for quality, not quantity then. I will try to make the session as brief as possible, but I'm introducing hopefully an important topic that is not really well addressed in the medical education literature, and yet it is a very important topic, which is the student engagement. So when we look at the student engagement, the first impression that comes to us is that we don't want probably the students in the class to be like this or like this. But maybe we are looking for something like this or like this. But that's actually is looking at one dimension of student engagement, which is related mainly to participation in activities and things like that. What I'm introducing to you today is another dimension of student engagement, actually the multiple other dimensions that, as I have said earlier, that they are not well addressed in the medical education literature, yet they are extremely important. And hopefully by the end of the session, I'm going to give some highlights on the important aspects related to this construct of student engagement. if we look at the publication related to student engagement, we can see that it started just in the past 2 decades with few publications internationally, and then we can see a marked rise in the interest about publishing about this area. But still there is a lot of confusion about what it means by student engagement, how it is conceptualized, how do we measure it, what are the driving factors for student engagement, what are the dimensions of student engagement, how can we evaluate or measure the engagement in different contexts, and so on. So there are huge amount of questions that are related to this construct. They are not addressed, and even if they are addressed in the medical education literature, we will see that there is some fuzziness around the construct. There is confusion about many areas, and many gaps are there that are required to be addressed. When we looked at the student engagement in medical education, we published a scoping review in medical education in last year, in 2022. Actually, it was about a few months ago. And we can see, if you read that scoping review, you will realize that there are several gaps in the literature that are still to be addressed around the student engagement. And then we followed that by an AMI guide that was published a couple of months ago around student engagement in health professions education. The most important aspect about this guide is that we developed a new framework that is taking into consideration the comprehensive aspect related to student engagement. And one important novel approach in this conceptual framework is that the student engagement is not taking from the consideration of the student as a consumer or as an end user, but looking at students as partners in education. And this is very important aspect that, as I said earlier, that it is not really well addressed, and that there are some publications in the literature, but still the message is not clear, and there are yet a lot of studies that are required. So the first question that probably come to our mind is what is a student engagement? What do we mean by student engagement? Is student engagement participation in class, or empowering the students, the sense of belonging and sense of being valued in the place? The motivation, is it engagement? And so on. Many things that are related to student engagement and what it means probably are not clear. But what we came up with, the definition in the recent AMI guide, is a comprehensive definition that takes into consideration the different aspects related to student engagement. So actually it's an investment of time and energy in not only academic activities, but also non-academic activities, not only related to learning, but also students as teachers, as researchers, as a role that has a role in governance of the medical colleges and the university, and also their role in the community. And they are involved in different dimensions. So not only the behavioral aspect of participation, but also the cognitive and affective domain, and also agentic being having a role in changing and the decision-making related to the education process, and also the socio-cultural dimension of engagement. So from the theoretical perspective, I'm not going to go into details of the student engagement construct, because really it's a very comprehensive model, but probably I will highlight some of the important aspects. For example, when we look at the theory behind student engagement, there are mainly three theories. One that looks at engagement as an internal psychological process, which is a psychological perspective. And another dimension looks at what the students do when engaging, not only the students, but also what the medical schools do to engage the students, which is the behavioral dimension. And finally, the sociocultural, which takes into consideration the social aspect and the cultural aspect and how the students engage in different cultures, in different social groups and so on. So there are different models related specifically to the engagement. Actually, I will not go into details because of the time, but that's one of the models. Self-determination theory is a very famous theoretical model that looks at motivation or fulfillment of the basic needs, and that will lead to motivation, and therefore the students will get engaged. So that will have a repercussion on designing the curriculum and designing the activities, the learning activities, so that if we fulfill these needs for the students, they will most likely get engaged. School work engagement model with the three components: dedication and vigor and absorption. That's another dimension. Also the flow theory, which is probably mostly used in gaming and by the people who are using the technology and the games. They are utilizing the flow theory, which indicate that if you have certain characteristics of the game, for example, that will take the user into a state of flow where there will be intrinsic enjoyment, intense concentration, and then the time will pass quickly. They will not feel the time. So by applying or extrapolating from the flow theory, it can be actually applied to educational activities. And finally, the community of practice, which is again another common theoretical model that mainly applies to engagement of students as partners when they engage in not only learning, but learning also teaching other students the sense of belonging, experiencing, and so on, by getting involved in different activities. This is the conceptual framework that we introduced in the AMI guide that looks at the student engagement as a comprehensive construct that takes into consideration not only the student engagement construct with the dimensions, the behavioral, emotional, cognitive, agentic, and sociocultural, but also the other part, which is here, related to not only the engagement of students in learning process, but students as partners in education, provision of education, in scholarly research, in governance of the medical school, and in community activities. That's the part related to the engagement process. But also another part of the model which looks at the antecedents or the drivers for engagement related to what the medical schools do or the institutions do to stimulate the engagement with the comprehensive practices that can go from the culture of the institution itself to the teaching and learning process to how the curriculum is implemented, the teaching stuff, and so on. And also the student component, where the actually characteristics of the student and the interaction between the two, between the students and between the faculty. There are mediators there, like motivation, self-efficacy, the reflective practice, and the sense of belonging. All these, they can lead to engagement if there is a fulfillment of these aspects. The last part of the model, which is related to the outcomes of engagement, where actually you can measure the outcomes on short term or long term, and as Professor Hamdi said initially, that measuring probably the outcomes is difficult, but there are some studies there that looked at this, and there are some evidence of some of the outcomes of engagement, but probably So this is a conceptual model that some of its aspects are there. It is based on research evidence, but probably there is a lot of areas that require to be addressed in order to test the different components related to this model. So the part that I want to stress here is that we are not teaching the students to, or stimulating the students to be engaged, but also the teaching by students and teaching with students. So the role of the student is not a passive receiver, but also as an active partner in the process of teaching and learning. So these are, I think, I will go quickly. These are the dimensions of engagement. These are samples of what do we mean by cognitive engagement, like concentration, perceived value of learning, using of higher order thinking, behavioral like participation, persistence, doing effort, participating in curricular or extracurricular activities, or emotional like feeling of happiness, feeling that they are valued in the place, feeling of the belonging or the sense of pride of being belonging to the institution. Agentic, meaning that they have a say in the process of teaching and learning. And sociocultural means that the quality of social interactions and the predictive actions related to different cultural contexts. How do we measure? This is an area, again, that requires a lot of, because of the comprehensiveness of the construct, then the most likely there will be no one method that can measure the comprehensive nature of the construct. So there are several methods there, starting from surveys, from direct observation of the students, interviews, real-time measures, and so on. So this is probably this is one of the papers that is already submitted, but it is probably under the. How many minutes left? Done. Okay. So these are, I think I'll just go back here, and these are the main strategies of how can we engage the students. Promoting psychological safety, where you can actually give the student the chance to feel that they can make opinions or share in providing their views without any sort of feeling that they are threatened. A culture of community where the students can get into small groups, they can act with the different, either at the faculty level or at the student level. Use of active learning, all the active learning strategies, problem-based learning, team-based learning, flipped classrooms, and so on. And use of technology, of course, very important if we use it properly to engage our students. So that's, I think, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Kasab. I would like to extend a sincere thank you from the audience and for the session today, and especially because at DMCG, we are just initiating a project on research on student engagement. It's a multi-centric, multinational research which is just in process. I would like to invite you to join our research.
Sure.
If you may.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it would be a privilege since you are the one who have authored the AMI Guide on Student Engagement. So thank you very much, Prof. Yeah, could you please stay on stage?
Honorable guests, we have now finally arrived at the last and much awaited session for today, the future of education. As Malcolm once rightly said, education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. This session aims to provide valuable insight into the trends that shall shape the future of medical education and to spark ideas for the collective success of learners and educators across the globe. And it is only justified that the moderator for this session is an eminent physiologist, an expert in the field of medical education with a double major in healthcare and quality management. She is a passionate teacher, an active researcher, an internationally renowned speaker, a personal role model, and last but not the least, the current Associate Dean of Research and Graduate Studies at DMCG. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly join me in welcoming Professor Rasha Aldeeb to shed light on this topic.
Thanks and appreciation to our graduate, Dr. Afra. I'm honored and humbled at the same time with the kind words that you shared about me. Thank you so much. And allow me to introduce our speaker for this session, Prof. Rania Saleh. She is the Community Service and the Environment Development Lead, and at the same time, the head of the Anatomy Division in New Giza University. Professor Rania worked at the Anatomy Department at Ain Shams University since 1999, and she holds multiple certificates and degrees as Diploma in Health Profession Education and Total Quality Management, in addition to the Professional Human Resource Management Certificate from the AUC in Egypt. In 2012, Professor Rania got certified as a trainer and HR consultant approved by the IBCT and worked as a trainer at the Training and the Development Center in Ain Shams University and as a visitor trainer in many Egyptian universities, both in the private sector and the local sector. Professor Rania worked as a vice director, then a director of the International Scientific Relations Office, Faculty of Medicine, and as a director of the ranking office in the Ain Shams University, and she was a member of the Committee for Developing the Cultural Affairs and Mission Sectors in the Ministry of Higher Education in Egypt. In 2015, Professor Rania received 2 awards, one from the Faculty of Medicine Ain Shams University and in addition to a total award from the Ain Shams University. Please welcome Professor Rania.
Good evening. First of all, It's working? First of all, I would like to thank you all for this opportunity, to thank Professor Dr. Samar.
This is for the forward slide, this is for the backward slide.
It's okay. Good evening. First, I would like to thank Professor Samar Abdelazim for inviting me to this great event and Dr. Yusuf Al-Taib for this invitation. It's time for the change. How many times today you hear the word change? I think many times you hear the change of curriculum, you hear the change of teaching methods, you hear the change all the day. We have to change the direction, you maybe change the way you learn or the way you behave. It's all over the time we have to change. But change is scary. Actually very scary, and the future is unknown, and you don't guarantee that the future is gonna work like the way you think. And most of us like security, like guarantees, and it's stressful for us to go for change. So why change? First, if you don't like change, let me tell you that it comes from external forces. Maybe external forces force you to change. Technology development, change in the requirements for accreditation, requirements for quality control. So the external forces force you to change. And if you follow the change, you will be more flexible, more understanding, and you will develop logical thinking. Internal forces also force you, if you have the internal force to develop, to be a better person that you are today, go for the change, act on yourself, change yourself, and work towards your goal. Change leads to opportunities. You may need to change your institution if it doesn't give you more professional development every now and then. You have to develop your faculty, you have to develop your employees so they have more commitment for you. They field that they are developing. So if you are looking for better opportunity, you may leave the city, you may go to another country to search for better improvement in your life and better chances. So I like the word or the sentence that said, each change is an invitation for another change and another opportunities. You don't convince yet? Let me tell you that the change leads you or makes you move on, leaving behind all the bad circumstances or all the bad choices that you have made. Leave all the bad things behind you, leave them in the past, and change. And finally, if you are not that comfortable with the change, let me tell you that change is inventable anyway, and it is the only constant in life is a change. So if a change, it's a fact, and we have to change. What is change management? As the scientists of management define it, it's to perform the change in an orchestrated form, in a process. It's a process to our systemic approach to deal with the transition in technology, in process, anything. Change it in the organization, need a systemic approach to do it, to perform it. This is Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin is a psychologist, one of the greatest psychologists, a German psychologist, and one of the pioneers of the social organizational psychology. And he has a model called Kurt Lewin Change Theory, one of the oldest model for a change. This model formed from 3 stages: unfreeze, change, and refreeze. And let me tell you that it started his model at 1940s and still holds true today. Each one of them has many details beneath, but maybe the time is not enough to explain every stage in details. However, the unfreeze stage. What's meant by unfreeze stage is not only breaking the old system, but also, or the most important, is to prepare the organization to change, prepare the people for change, to create the need for change, or create the urgency for change. Why do we have to change? Then the stage of change, which is not happening in a blink of eye or in a day. It's gonna take time. People gonna take time to be adapted to the new system. Maybe not only person like the change and will be on the board. Just you tell them that change is better for organization, so I believe in what you say and come with you. No, it's gonna take a time. And it's going to take a time when you are changing something related to the culture of the people. So it takes long time to be adapted, to be convinced. Finally, the refreeze stage. And when I have to go for the refreeze when the changes are taking the shape and people are embarrassed with the new way of working, the organization now is ready for the change. How? Look for the continuous feedback. Look how to support these changes. Look how to sustain these changes and make a reward system for people who are supporting the change that you have made to the organization. This was the Kurt Lewin model of 3 stages of change. Comes after Kurt Lewin, one of the greatest model for a change is Kutter 8 Step for a Change. This is John Paul Kutter. He is a professor of leadership at Harvard Business School, and also he is the founder of Kutter International. It's more simple than that of Kurt Lewin, and it's applicable, and maybe changes than in the education or in the medical education specifically takes the steps or similar to the steps that of Kutter. Kutter start his 8 steps with creating the urgency of a change. Create the sense of urgency of a change. Why do we have change? I am comfortable within I'm happy within my comfortable zone. I'm happy with my old teaching method. I'm happy with my old assessment method. Why I have to change? We have to change our delivery methods because we were at a time at pandemic. People all are at home, students are home, at our home, professors. So we have to change. We have to change method of delivery. We have to change curriculum, maybe. We have to change assessment methods, maybe. Then form a coalition to support your ideas, to support your vision, and create the new vision to direct the change and the strategies to achieve this vision. Not only you and your supporters that you have to know the vision very well, but communicate the vision throughout the organization. So you have many believers in your vision. Empower people, empower them to break the barriers, to help you to encourage to take risk, calculated risk, let me say, and creative problem solving. It's not working. It's okay. Then plan for reward system. And reward system here in the middle of the change, that means that you are celebrating short win. Don't wait for the end of the stage to celebrate. No, celebrate each stage, celebrate each short win. This motivates people to work with you to complete your vision. Consolidate improvement, reassess the chain and make necessary adjustment if needed. And reinforce the changes by demonstrating the relationship between the change that you have made and the organizational success. This was the 8 steps of Kutter. Let me tell you stories of a change that I have passed through. I tell you? See. This was my experience with Ain Shams University about the story of university ranking. The story of ranking started by visiting QS Summit on 2015. 2015 was the first visit and was the first exposure to QS rankings and rating system. We traveled and we back with new idea and we back with a risk taking. Are we ready? Are we ready to expose our university or our faculty to international evaluation? Yes. Our leader at this time support the idea, and we took the risk to participate in QS rating system, not ranking, the start with rating system. And first, we got 3 stars. The first, we got 3 stars. Then the idea spread to the Ministry of Higher Education. The Ministry of Higher Education formed a committee from professors from all Egyptian university. It's the Egyptian University for Ranking. This committee, you have to train them. So the Ministry of Higher Education know this. They send us to Netherlands to train, to practice the analytical methods for ranking. And nowadays, we are celebrating each year with all the Egyptian university with the progression in different ranking and rating system. It works? Yes, it works. Other experience with introducing the community colleges and technical universities in Egypt. This idea was far beyond our imagination. To change the culture, to accept the idea of technical universities in Egypt was difficult. So again, in collaboration with Fulbright Commission, the Ministry of Higher Education formed a committee to visit Florida State University to study the implementation process of technical and community colleges. And actually, Ain Shams University has collaboration with Ocean and Keene University, which are technical or community colleges. So, if you want to change, you have to have the following. First, vision, plus skills to do this. You have resources to do this or not, incentives to promote the change, and plan, executive plan to do this change. So you reach your designed change. If you miss one of them, you will not reach your destination. If everything is present, but you don't have the vision, so I'm confused, I don't know where I'm going. If you have everything, but you don't have the skill to do this, oh, I'm anxious, I have an anxiety, I don't know how this is going, or I'm going to do this change. I have everything without resources. This is so frustrating. And finally, and if you don't have incentives for your organizational employees, you will have the change, but it's a slow change. They are not motivating to do the change. And if you don't have a plan to implement the change, you will have multiple restarts. You will do a plan, then it didn't work. You have another plan, you have another plan, so you will have, or you will suffer from multiple restarts. And finally, to apply this in medical education, change management in medical education means that's a process of managing and implementing a change in the educational environment in order to improve the quality of medical education. Following similar steps that of Kuter, so the first is establishing the state of urgency or the state of why we have to do this change. Then you have to have a team, working team, not only for planning, also but implementing and monitoring the process of change throughout the curriculum or throughout the year. Conducting the needs assessment, you have to assess what you have and what you don't have. Maybe you don't have skillful and knowledgeable staff for doing this type of a change that you want. Or maybe you don't have the resources. Or maybe you may have to change rules or regulations to do this change. Setting the plan and start with the faculty development. It's very, very important one. And communicate this plan to other departments and other parties of the faculty or the organization. And the most important, to engage the leadership, even in small changes. You have to have their support, you have their approval, and the most important, the alignment of the change that you want to do with the strategic plan of the university. Don't forget to deal with conflicts and the stress. And we all practice conflicts when we have to start the integration between the departments, to removing the overlap between different disciplines, what we said and what other departments said, what we do and what clinicians do. Areas of conflicts, you have to be ready to deal with this. Anticipate the challenges, not wait for the risk to happen and then manage. No, anticipate the challenges and plan how to overcome them. Be good communicator, not only with the people in your organization, but all the stakeholders, to ensure that all parties are on board. Monitoring and evaluation, not at the end, but throughout the whole process of a change. Let me end my presentation with this one, Alan Deutschman, with his book, Change or Die. And he mentioned 3 words as keys for change: relate, repeat, reframe. What he means by relate with people, with passion, with inspire, that have hope to disseminate, to support others. Repeat, he mentioned that repeat means practice the skill that you want to have until you master it. And reframe means the deep-rooted beliefs and conceptual frameworks must be identified and reallocated and changed to have the desired change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rania. Now for the final speak is our Professor Dr. Dalia Gaber. She's a female fellow, and she's currently working in the Medical Biochemistry Molecular Biology Division in the College of Medicine, Gulf Medical University. Earlier, she had worked at the Faculty of Medicine, Helwan University, as a Biochemistry Department Supervisor and Vice Director of the Medical Education Unit. She has earned her MD degree from Faculty of Medicine, Ain Shams University in 2011, and 1 year later, her MD thesis and work was published in a book by the Lambert Academic Publishing in March 2012. Please welcome Dr. Dalia Gaber.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to participate in this elegant conference. Thank you, Professor Summer, for inviting me. Today I'm going to talk to you about my experience about TBL in Helwan University. And this work is entitled Evaluation of TBL Using Script Concordance Test. How do you Okay. So TBL is about encouraging students to be active participants in the learning process, and this is our main role as medical educators. We always want our students to be fully engaged. We want to make sure that they are building up their knowledge, they are gaining experience. It's not only to conduct TBL, but we have to make sure that they are acquiring and building up their knowledge. So TBL is one of the interactive tools which I prefer very much in teaching, since my discipline is biochemistry and it's difficult to students, so I would like to make my sessions more interactive, to make it more engaging to students, not too much boring, because the subject is a bit difficult. I think that it enhances the student cognitive skills and critical thinking. But we can do some interventions on TBL to make our sessions more engaging, to make sure that the students are gaining their knowledge, they are fully engaged, they are participating. Because we have in Helwan medical students, Helwan Medical School, we have large number of students per batch. So whenever I would do a TBL session with my colleagues, integrated TBL session or only for the biochemistry department, I'm not sure that all the students are engaged. We have about 900 students per batch. So it's very difficult that to make sure that they are all of them are fully engaged. Especially during the COVID era, when we shifted to online teaching, we started to do online TBL in March 2020. I tried to search the Zoom application how to do the TBL online, till I found that there is something called the breakout rooms. I never heard about it before. So we started to do some TBL sessions online for the students. They were not so engaged because of the large number. So I tried to do some post-TBL reflections on the learning management system. I would like to ask them to reflect on the session after they finish. I would give them another case to solve after the session, all this to make sure that they are engaged as much as possible. After the COVID, we do both. We shifted to do both face-to-face sessions as well as online sessions. Also, we still have large number of students, so I started to think of doing assessment for my TBL session. So in this study, I used the script concordance test to assess the impact of TBL in improving the student clinical reasoning. Of course, they are year one medical students. They are not yet supposed to develop clinical reasoning skills, but why not to try? Why not to try to engage them more? Why not to try to make them think in a better way to acquire critical thinking skills or something like that? So, what happened? So, okay. So in 2021 and 2022 during this academic year, we conducted a cohort study on year 1 medical students by doing script concordance test after immediately attending integrated TBL session with between the biochemistry and the pathology departments. 750 students participated in this test following TBL sessions in Module 1 and Module 3. The scores were calculated based on the frequency each point was chosen from a 3-point Likert scale. The weight of each choice was estimated based on the expert opinion, because script concordance test is not about that one choice is correct. No, maybe more than one choice can be correct, and you can give partial mark for the student. Based on this, we placed the scores and we calculated what will be the maximal score, what will be the partial mark, and the test was repeated twice. This is an example of a script concordance test introduced to the students on Google form after the TBL session, and these are the responses of the students. So, as a summary, this is the comparison between the success rate in Module 1 and Module 3 and the high score. As we can see here that in Module 1, 37% of students, they got the success mark, while in it's Module 2, not 3, but okay, the other module, the success percentage was 65.5%. This means that there was 77% improvement from Module 1 to Module 3 in the success percentage. But what about the maximal score? No, few students acquired less students acquired the maximal score in Module 3. Now, why does this happen? Well, I interpreted with my colleagues that this could be due to the Dunning-Kruger effect, which means that the less competent we are, the more confident we are about our choice. But the more we acquire competence, the less we are confident, and so we have many choices to choose from. It's not strictly yes, it's not strictly no, there can be something in between. So we are trying to increase and make our thinking more broader and think of other alternatives that maybe we can have more than one choice. It's not only yes or no. So after repeating this experience, I think it was very engaging to the students. It made them more engaged in the TBL. They would prepare themselves more because they knew that they have a test after this TBL session. And of course, we discussed these cases with them after the TBL. We discussed the script concordance test and why this choice is correct, why this choice will take 50% of the mark, and so on. And since there was improvement between the two modules in the overall success percentage, so I think it could be a good way to measure the student engagement after attending a TBL session, especially when we have large number of students and we are not sure if all of them are fully engaged and fully prepared the lecture before they come or not. Besides, it enhances the engagement and it makes them acquire better cognitive skills and maybe make them acquire more critical thinking skills after this. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Dalia. Let me invite Dr. Fawzia. Come, we'll share together the moderation of this session. And we'll start with Dr. Rania as a certified trainer and a medical educator. What would you give us as the best steps to recommend for us when we are introducing a new teaching method or modality in our curriculum?
Okay, if I'm wearing the hat of a medical educator only, maybe I will tell you that the urgency or the need for a change is the most important thing. People are comfortable with old methods, so you have to convince them why they do have to change. This is the most important thing, to create the need to convince them for the need for the change. Maybe we have to do this for accreditation purpose. We have to do this because of the results of a student survey. Very bad results of a student satisfaction is very bad. Or maybe the grades of the students are not satisfactory. So you have to create the need for the change. This is as a medical educator only, but if I'm putting the hat of the trainer too, I mentioned focus on people, focus on them, train them. They will resist what they didn't know. If you practice or if you develop the faculty, they will not resist. If you answer or address their anxiety, they have questions within. If we are losing our jobs, or if this affects our salaries, or at the time of a change, rumors arise. So you have to deal with this. So communicate with people, communicate with the stakeholders, people not only the faculty, with the students. We have already get used to this type of assessment. Why we change? And the parents of them, maybe they are resisting the change more than the students. Like we have experience in the Ministry of Education, when the minister tried to change the system of education in Egypt, the most resistance comes from the parents, not the students. Maybe some students enjoy the learning journey, the new learning journey, but parents no. So the people, focus on people, focus on your stakeholders, either the staff, the students, their other stakeholders.
And for the parents, do you recommend doing community engagement activity, or how do we do this? How do we tackle buying in the parents of our students to accept the need for the change?
Maybe students, parents are more likely involved in their student teaching and learning process in younger age. But at a bigger level, or if you are talking about higher education, the student satisfaction and results will reflect on their parents. When the students are happy with their journey, they will tell their parents. The most important, the student rather than the parents. Yeah. Maybe this affects the student at a younger age, but at our age that we are dealing with, the student is more important than his parent.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Professor Mohi, I have a question for you. You have given a very good description of the use of portfolio at your university for 2 years. We would like to know what were the challenges that you had and what was the level of acceptance that you had for the use of the portfolio.
Okay, thank you so much. I think the first part of your question is really linking assessment to learning, which is very important. And as we all agree that as educators, assessment drive learning. The assessed curriculum is the real curriculum, is the learned curriculum. And this is why we have to use assessment strategically to attain the learning objectives. This is why the importance of portfolio, which capture the whole spectrum of competencies. And now we should apply Emirati maths, which include 9 competencies, and these competencies can be captured by the portfolio. And this means that we have to work together also for the acceptance of portfolio by both students and mentors and faculty. And this is really very important. I think from our experience, we started with the portfolio as a voluntary activity and as extracurricular activities that only for mentoring psychosocial and problems and anything related to attrition of students, for example. And then the response, really, acceptability is not good. And always students, really, particularly in the first 2 years, which we applied, that really are mark hunters. You know, they want things which will be included in the curriculum. And I think if portfolios not really be part of the curriculum and be part of assessment, then and also should include really a good portion on an assessment, then the students will not take care of it. Then we move and included it as the part of longitudinal assessment using programmatic assessment, which is based on competencies and EPAs. And this is really has increased acceptability by students and also by mentors. And for faculty also, we consider it as part of their KPIs and as part of their teaching load. So this is also increased the acceptability of portfolio and the accompanying program like mentoring and programmatic assessment.
Yeah, Prof,
Thanks.
was this used as part of programmatic assessment or was it just formative?
Yeah, actually we have took the Emarat Smith competencies, the 9 competencies, this is the program. Unfortunately, we have component. At each of at the end of each phase, for example, the pre-med, the first 2 years, we have a comprehensive exam. Now is in knowledge. Now included the other competencies. So that to capture all in a form of programmatic, and also at the end of the preclinical, and at the end of the clinical, the final exit exam. So the FIE, the final integrated exam, so also included the competencies, and now we are measuring through portfolio, which now have more acceptability. Thanks.
Okay, going to Professor Salah Kassab, being a physiologist, and I'm the same, we share the interest of knowing the mechanism of the outcome or the intended outcome. I would like to ask you to give us more about the finding related to the research, what the research found can hinder or enhance the student engagement in both, in learning and assessment. How do we do that?
Well, that's a very broad question. I will try maybe to highlight some of the important drivers, I think, for engagement of the students. One most important probably approach is the empowering of the students. You need to empower the students. They need to feel that their voice is heard, and not only heard, but you take action based on the voice. If you are collecting feedback from the students, they need to know that actions have been taken based on their feedback. Empowering also including the students in college committees, for example, or in different programs where they feel that they are empowered, their voice and their actions are taken into consideration whenever there is any decision that is taken. The second maybe approach is a feeling of community. They need to feel that they are part of the community, especially the transition period when the students, for example, when they enter the medical school, the transition from high school to the medical school it creates some sort of imbalance to most of the students actually. And creating the feeling of the community, the orientation program, senior students, they embrace them. They become part of a group or something where they feel that they belong to the place. Yeah. So this feeling of community is a very important driver that will make them get engaged rather than they feel that they are a foreign body or someone who is not part of the community. Of course, other drivers related to the curriculum and the instructional methods where you use active learning, engaging by using technology, and all these are important drivers. Psychological safety also that I mentioned in my presentation, where the students feel that their feedback is, again, here, this is part of empowering, and also feeling of safety, that they can give feedback about the performance of the faculty or something related to the medical school, and it's taken safely, so you are reducing the distance between the faculty and the students, and they feel that their voices are heard and they are safe to say any comments that are constructive.
As if we're saying we're taking the students as partner in the decision taking.
Yes. Yeah? Of course, yeah.
Thank you.
That was a very interesting discussion, Professor Kassab. I have another question to Dr. Dalia. It was a very interesting study that you had conducted for 900 students. Yes. You have done script concordance for TBL. Now, I was just wondering, what would be the possibility of using this in other institutions? And what actually inspired you to do this? It's really intriguing. And
well, first, what inspired me to do this is the large number of students and the lack of participation of some students, because when you have that large class, it's very different. I have to admit, it's very different from my experience here in GMU. When I started working here in GMU, the class is 100, so it's very good for doing a TBL, and I'm seeing everyone, I'm making everyone participating. They cannot escape it. They will not skip it. But when I'm having 900 students in the class, most of them are brilliant students, but some of them, they will lose interest. They will not be on the same page. Many of them will not prepare because I cannot follow all these. We have limited number of staff and large number of students. So we will miss the good students. Actually, we will miss them. And with the online shift...
We will miss student engagement.
Yes.
Right?
And with the online shift as well, we need to do some of the sessions online and some of the sessions face-to-face to distribute the work, and it has something to do with the logistics as well. So I was thinking with my colleagues what to do, and we tried to search, and we found a script concordance test. I never heard of it before. And it's mainly for clinical reasoning, and these are year one students. I'm not able to develop their clinical reasoning skills now, but maybe I can make them think that there are alternatives. When we discuss after this, maybe they will think that there is no one cause for the disease, there is no one protocol for treatment, just to make them think.
COVID was a trigger,
yes.
I should say.
Yes.
Just one more question, which you can all share. I'm really interested with this kind of questions. This test is really challenging for us as a faculty member to write this type of question. I don't know how,
it's very challenging.
I don't know how you got that courage to buy in the students and to do the engagement.
All the faculty in the department, they had to work with me.
Because it's really challenging.
To put the question, we need to choose which question will take 50%, which question will take. I search in the literature how is it done, because I have no experience about it before. So we will
faculty will be running from this type of question. I don't know how you managed to do this with the students also.
We were trying, and that's why we did it twice, only twice. Maybe we'll do it more in the future, inshallah.
Thank you. I thank you all, and I'm inviting Dr. Samar.
Thank you again. Thank you to everyone.
As we approach the end of this event, I would like to extend my immense gratitude to each and every one of you for your valued presence and for making this event a huge success. I would also like to comment on the tireless efforts of all the organizers involved in turning this dream into a reality. This event is a testament of all their hard work and dedication extended from all. To successfully conclude and wrap up this glorious day, I would like to yield the floor to Professor Samar Ahmed to end this evening with a take-home message for all. Thank you one and all, and I wish you all a wonderful evening ahead.
Dear all, thank you so much for sticking with us till the end of the day. I think today was an exciting day for all of us. It was surely exciting for us who organized the day, but we sure hope it was exciting for you as well. We enjoyed the day very much. We learned a lot, and hopefully what was learned today or what we heard today could act as an opening statement for the changes to come. Change, as we heard from Professor Rania, is inevitable. It's happening as we speak. It will continue to happen. But the question now is, what do we take from this session that will allow us to make the process of change as smooth as possible? We learned a lot today. We learned that curriculum is a living being. We learned that curriculum has to be contextual. And we learned that it's not important what is being done elsewhere in the world, but we need to ask the question, as Professor Hussam Hamdi said, why? Why are we doing this change? So whenever we are approaching change, I will in the future, start by asking myself, why am I doing this transformation? And once the why is known, it will now be easier for us to start adopting a methodology towards this change. Even in assessment, the session around assessment, it was very enlightening to learn that we do not take for granted words that we hear out there like programmatic assessment. It does not come with without its own shortcomings. So be always aware to keep our eyes open and to look for the shortcomings of whatever is being thrown at us. This is what I learned. I hope you learned something additional. But from here, from this stage, I would like you all to keep an open mind, think for ourselves, what do our students need? As we heard in the student engagement session, there are a lot of attributes and there are a lot of elements that would mean that our students become more engaged. Let's keep our eyes open to see what are the actual what does actual student engagement looks like? Is it something that is collected by a survey? Absolutely not. There are so many other ways to see whether or not our students are engaged. So, throughout the day, we went from curriculum to assessment, to simulation, to teaching and learning, and we ended this day with a take-home message that we hope some of you can add to or take home to start implementing the change cycle that we are all being a part of, whether we like it or not. Having said that, I would like to call our Dean, Professor Dr. Yusuf Al-Tayyib, up to the stage to give a gesture of gratitude for all our guests that were here today, that contributed from their knowledge and their wisdom to make this day a better day and to make it worth our time. Thank you so much, Professor Yusuf.
Thank you so much for staying with us up till this time, late in the evening. First of all, again, I would like to ask all the participants, speakers, and attendees, particularly those who took the effort to travel all the way from United States, from UK, from Egypt, and even from inside the country. Thank you so much for staying. As Prof. Samar mentioned that we had a lot of lessons, but we need to look back and try to extract what are the messages that we need to take home on each aspect, starting from the program, as she mentioned, to assessment, etc. I wish everybody have enjoyed the stay today. But I feel that it's my duty before we leave this floor, we need to have, we're going to distribute some
tokens of appreciation.
Tokens as an expression for our gratitude for those who participated in the session. Thank you. May I call the speakers?
Okay, Professor Yusuf?
Yeah, may I call?
Can you take your stand, please? Take your stand. Sir, تحب توقف علشان ننادي البتاع عشان تعمل over? Sorry? Yes, I will. وقف حضرتك بس stand here, please. I will follow you. 1 second, please. First one, please. Okay, Professor Hussam Hamdi. Take it to him. On the floor. 1 second. I'll give you the one, you take it and go. Okay. Very good. Just put it here. We're doing recording. Tina. Maybe open it. Open it. Yeah, until he takes it out. Professor Janet Grant. Yeah, this is what we should have been doing. Professor Muhammad Muhawi. Professor Ibrahim Inwa. Just give me the Professor Salman Goraya. Is Professor Salman still here? No, I think it is. Okay. Who else is Professor John Norsini. Okay, just keep it as it is. Okay. Okay. Dr. Dalia Gaber. ليه؟ ما اعرفش. اوكي. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It just needs. Just leave it for now. Just leave it for now. Okay, Ahmed. Just leave us. Professor Ahmed Al-Minawi. رانيا اسمعي مسكيها بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم مسكيها حلو مسكيها حلو
Let's just keep them this way so
I
that
think
it's
so,
easier.
yes. Just keep them as they are. بتاعت يوسف هدي بتاعت يوسف فيها الاسم يا دينا مش عارف. Please just leave it as it is. Sorry? I know that. Dr. Rania Salah. Dr. Muhammad Taha, Professor Muhammad Taha. Yeah.
He's asking to keep them standing. Professor Yusuf, keep them standing. Not for people, just do what I tell you. That's the logic now, okay? This, Ahmed Rashid.
Professor Ahmed Rashid. It's okay. It's okay. No problem. Good. Good. Wallahi, thank you so much. Professor فوزية. Professor فوزية.
Yeah, it's okay.
Professor محي الدين مكذوب. Mr. Richard Ormond. Dr. Yusuf, could you please leave them? Leave them as they are. Professor لميا محسن. بعد كده ايه؟ leave them كلهم نايمين كده، اوكي؟ بليز. كلهم زي بعض. Professor أسامة الشاذلي. دكتور يونس زيدون. مش حبيبنا وتاج راسنا فوق راسنا نقول ايه بس. بروفيسور صلاح كساب. خلاص اوكي يلا مين بعد كده؟ رشيد. بروفيسور رشا ديب. بروفيسور عبد المنعم المرضي. شوفان هنا ايش هي؟ بروفيسور شيفان خنداي. Yes. Just wait. By the time she comes up. بعدها بقول الاسماء غلط؟ لا بتقولي صح. خلاص. لا خلاص.
Professor Samar Ahmad. Open it, I'll give it to him. And open it out.
Open it just.
This is for Yusuf, right? Yes. And last but not least, Professor Yusuf al-Tayyib.
We
want. Can we have a group photo? Are you all okay with that, please? Thank you. The speakers, please, our guests. The MCG faculty and staff, can we try and all get on the stage? Yeah, and I want the students to get ready. Maybe we can have a photo at the end with the students as well, please. They've been a tremendous help today. Yeah, with the students. Students, can you get ready? We want to take a photo with all of you, please.